Okay. All right. Okay, good morning, colleagues. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome back to meeting number 114 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. I do want to remind colleagues, I don't think I'm going to read the entire script again, but a reminder that there are some new provisions in place for our translation devices to avoid audio feedback. So please make sure, most importantly, that when you are not using your earpiece, that it's placed face down on the sticker that has been provided in front of you on the table. This is to help ensure that our translators who work very hard on our behalf and do incredibly important work have the ability to do so in a safe environment. At our last meeting, colleagues, we were considering a sub-amendment put forward by MP Cooper, which was in relation to an amendment from MP Matheson, which was in relation to a motion that was moved by MP Romanato. So we are going to, in a moment, go back to our conversation about said sub-amendment. Currently, colleagues, on the list, I have simply Madame Gaudreau, who would like to speak to this. Mr. Cooper, I'll add your list. Your name, Mr. Calkins? Okay, I perhaps have failed to put it down, but I'm happy to add it now. Mr. Cooper, can I add him first?
Blaine and then me.
Okay, not a problem. Yeah. So I definitely had Madame Gaudreau first, but then we'll go to you, Mr. Calkins. We'll go to Mr. Cooper. And then a reminder that we also have a fairly comprehensive second list. And when I refer to the second list, that is simply the list that, should we get back to the debate on the amendment, we will respect the list of names that were there. And it turns out, Madame Gaudreau, that is you as well. So with no further ado, the floor is yours, Madame.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, congratulations on your first meeting this week. I think we're going to be able to work constructively. I hope so, at least. So I kind of have to go give a bit of context so that you can so that you can understand where I'm coming from. I'll speak slowly and to allow the interpretation to follow me. So with regard to the motion, and I'm, in terms of harassment, it's important that we look at this issue, because it's also about safeguarding our democracy. Harassment makes us kind of censor ourselves, so it's really, that's an important thing to keep in mind. I am also going to talk about our values. And I think, with the parties here, we have to look to safeguarding Canadian unity. And I can say that because I'm not involved in partisanship. What's good for us in Quebec, we're in favor of it, and what's not good for us, we're not in favor of it. So I want to kind of do some awareness raising here. Now, remember the 70 meetings that we held on foreign and we were able to have an investigation, or a public inquiry rather, that was independent. And that the process started, and now, it takes time, but now I understand that some people that, who, want to comment on everything that's coming at a very slow pace at the Hug Commission. But I have to say that we have to respect what we were able to come up with. And it's all parties. Now, do you remember in the summer, we adopted the process, and we did that together. So all the subjects that can come out of that, all the complementary or information, if we if we are confident, we have to respect the good judgment of the commission, and we have to let the process just play out. And I know that a number of us want to, to deal with what doesn't really regard us, but I really do not agree that we kind of lead a parallel in investigation, and that's what's happening. We all want things to go faster, but anyway, so that's the context that I wanted to give. So now, with respect to the motion on harassment, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, and I'm grateful that we took time to analyze this, and I asked a lot of questions. So I want answers. So this policy of harassment, and I think it comes up again every 5 years. We revisit it. And so the tabling of the motion to make this motion was tabled 2 years ago. So I understand that this policy or this regulation, deals with our reality, and it'll be play a very positive role in our relationships as well. Now, that said, right now, I would like to, or right away, before we adopt anything, I would like to have information, whether it's via the analysis or the RCMP or the clerk, what was proposed by my colleague. Is it the PROC's role to do an in-depth analysis of this? The Office of the Internal Affairs does a lot of analysis, and now I don't know if you've talked to your whips, but I have a lot of questions. Not with respect to the study, but with respect to the scope. Now, we've had 6 meetings, and we have to look at what our shortcomings are so that we can adopt this, a policy rather, that I hope will help. I think we're kind of going off the rails here. Now, we're adults, and when I have company and I have to debrief 28 students at the high school level, and you know what high school students can be like. They ask real questions, and I have to give real answers. Now, I don't know about you, but I was very ashamed. So if our work is about rebuilding trust and make sure that there are not shortcomings in democracy, I think we're caught and it's very embarrassing. So let's not forget that. So what I'm trying to say is that today, something's happening in the House, or things are happening in the House rather. We have to be constructive and effective. Now, I know a lot of people are not viewing us, but we do. We view ourselves. So call your citizens, and people are saying, well, what are you doing? We're being judged, we're being criticized, and when we have, people are asking us what we're doing with their money. So let's not forget them. So partisan strategies, they have a role to play. It's natural. But if the PROC does not act in a worthy way, by respecting democracy and the issues that we're facing, well, we might as well just stop and come back next section. So with regard to the sub-amendment, Mr. Chair, I think before anything else, I need some clarification. What was done, or what has been done, what must be done, and what should we be doing here in the PROC committee to meet the objectives of the main motion by Romanato. And so I felt I'm glad to have gotten that off my chest. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank my colleague from the bloc. I'll be very brief. I'll just also mention while I have the microphone, Mr. Chair, that the previous chair managed to get us 025B on a regular basis. I hope that I'm just teasing. The room below us is the one that we normally have, and anyway, we'll see. I won't hold this. You're 2 for 2 here, but we'll see about it afterwards. How you do on that front, but I'm just giving you a little bit of a jab there in good nature. So I would agree that with my Conservative colleagues pretty much at the table here that we need to pursue the foreign interference. I think we're about to find out that foreign interference. My understanding is that the House has made its decision, and question of privilege has been adopted. So I would imagine that we'll be discussing that in the context of these other 2 choices that are before us. We'll actually have 3 choices. So, and given 2 of those 3 choices will be foreign interference, and for a litany of other reasons that I think we should pursue the foreign interference, notwithstanding the timelines being my primary rationale, the timelines between now and the next federal election, should it be October 20th or October 27th of 2025, if we're going to actually make meaningful recommendations and have the opportunity for the government to respond to those recommendations with a legislative change and get through the legislative process, I feel that this would be something that would be of paramount importance and a priority for the committee. I'm not in any way suggesting that the original intention of the motion moved by Ms. Romanato is not important, but we're simply a matter of triaging what I believe to be the issues that are before us. And from my perspective, dealing with the issues of the sanctity of not only our electoral institutions, but the institution of Parliament itself, we need to pursue with this as a matter of priority. So I believe my colleague, Mr. Cooper, is next, Mr. Chair, so I'll cede the floor back to the Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Calkins. You are indeed correct. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would echo the comments of my colleague, Mr. Calkins, about the need for this committee to prioritize foreign interference, and that is underscored by the Speaker's ruling last evening, finding a prima facie question of privilege in respect of the failure of the government to inform 18 members of Parliament that they were the target and subject of a cyber attack by the Beijing-based communist regime. And there have been moments ago developments in respect of that ruling with a motion having been moved in the House last evening following the Speaker's ruling to refer that prima facie question of privilege to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Moments ago, the House gave its unanimous consent that the motion be referred to this. They gave unanimous consent to that motion, referring the question, prima facie question of privilege, to this committee. And with that, I would like to, at this time, give notice of my intention to move the following motion, and I will read the motion into the record And I would hope that there would be consent thereafter for members to adjourn debate on the sub-amendment that I had moved to Ms. Matheson's amendment in respect of Ms. Romanato's motion, because clearly, in light of the Speaker's ruling.
Point of
and
order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Ms. O'Connell.
Sorry, I just need clarity. The member can't give notice of motion and move a motion to adjourn debate at the same time. There's also no debate on a motion to adjourn debate. So could the member actually be clear on what he's trying to accomplish?
You are not incorrect, Ms. O'Connell. So just for clarity, Mr. Cooper, just want to understand for the benefit of the committee, you are not currently moving your motion. You are simply giving notice of introduction.
Precisely.
Correct?
Precisely.
Okay. Ms. O'Connell, does that?
Sorry, is he also adjourning debate? Because if so, there's no debate on that. That's
Yeah,
dilatory.
you're correct. So we, colleagues, we will not be able to enter into debate on the is dealt with, and that would either have to be dealt with in the form of an adjournment or a vote. So I'm going to allow Mr. Cooper to continue with the introduction, but of course he knows very well, and you're not wrong, Ms. O'Connell, that we can't begin debate on that motion until we have dealt with these affairs.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper, back to you.
That is well understood, Mr. Chair. So I now will give notice to the committee of the following motion, and it reads as follows. That in relation to its order of reference of Thursday, May 9th, 2024, regarding the prima facie contempt concerning the People's Republic of China cyber attack against members of Parliament, the committee, A, for the purposes of the study, make use for the purposes of the study, 1, the evidence received during its study on foreign election interference, 2, the evidence received during its study of the prima facie contempt concerning the intimidation campaign orchestrated by Wei Zhao against the member for Wellington Halton Hills and other members, and 3, the evidence received by the Standing Committee on Access to Information Privacy and Ethics during its study on foreign interference, provided it shall not limit the witnesses who may appear before the committee or the questions which may be asked of them. B, deem the evidence, including testimony and documents received by and publicly available on the website of the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference in Federal Electoral Processes and Democratic Institutions, to have been received by this committee and may be used in its reports, provided that it shall not limit the witnesses who may appear before the committee or the questions which may be asked of them or the documents which may be requested or ordered to be produced by the committee. C, invite the following witnesses to appear. 1, the Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, by himself for 2 hours. 2, the Honorable Bill Blair, Minister of National Defense and former Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, by himself for 2 hours. 3, the Honorable Marco Mendicino, former Minister of Public Safety, by himself for 1 hour. 4, the Honorable Harjit Sajjan, former Minister of National Defense, by himself for 1 hour. 5, the Honorable Anita Anand, former Minister of National Defense, by herself for 1 hour. 6, the panels of impacted Canadian members of Parliament of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China who wish to appear, provided that no more than 3 members shall appear on each panel for 1 hour per panel. 7, Eric Jantz, the Clerk of the House of Commons, by himself for 1 hour to discuss parliamentary privilege considerations. 8, Michelle Bedard, the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel of the House of Commons, by himself for 1 hour to discuss parliamentary privilege considerations and the production of documents. 9, officials of the House of Commons administration, by themselves for 2 hours to discuss IT and cybersecurity considerations, provided that 1 hour shall be in camera. 10, officials of the communications security establishment by themselves for 2 hours. 11, officials.
Mr. Cooper, just
Sorry.
going to interrupt you. I apologize for 1 minute. Just because you're reading it in officially here. On my copy, it says officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. You said establishment. Can you just clarify which for us, please?
I'm reading
A different version?
officials of the communications security establishment by themselves for 2 hours.
Okay, sorry. I was one ahead of you. Go ahead. Sorry.
11, officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service by themselves for 2 hours. 12, Natalie Drouin, Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister by herself for 1 hour. 13, Vincent Rigby, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister by himself for 1 hour. 14, David Morrison, former acting National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister by himself for 1 hour. 15, Jody Thomas, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister by herself for 1 hour. 16, officials of the Federal Bureau of Investigations by themselves for 1 hour. 17, officials of the Secretariat of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China by themselves for 1 hour. 18, academics, IT and cyber security experts and other witnesses requested by the committee, provided that the party shall file their preliminary lists of witnesses within 10 days of the adoption of this motion. D, order the production of all memoranda, briefing notes, emails, recordings of conversations, and any other relevant documents, including any drafts which are in the possession of any government department or agency, including the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, the Critical Election Incident Protocol Panel, any minister's office, the Prime Minister's office, or House of Commons administration containing information concerning cyber attacks and efforts to conduct cyber attacks against members of House of Commons by Advanced Persistent Threat 31, APT 31, and related entities, provided 1, these documents be deposited without redaction with the law clerk and parliamentary council in both official languages within 1 month of the adoption of this order. 2, a copy of the document shall also be deposited with the law clerk and parliamentary council in both official languages within 1 month of the adoption of this order, with any proposed redaction of information which in the government's opinion could reasonably be expected to compromise the identities of employees or sources or intelligence collecting methods of Canadian or allied intelligence agencies. 3, the law clerk and parliamentary council shall promptly notify the committee whether he is satisfied that the documents were produced as ordered, and if not, the chair shall be instructed to present forthwith on behalf of the committee a report to the House outlining the material facts of the situation. 4, the law clerk and parliamentary council shall assess the redactions proposed by the government pursuant to subparagraph 2 to determine whether he agrees that the proposed redactions conform with the criteria set out in some subparagraph 2, and A, if he agrees, he shall provide the documents as redacted by the government pursuant to subparagraph 2 to the clerk of the committee, or B, if he disagrees with some or all of the proposed redactions, he shall provide a copy of the documents redacted in the manner he determines would conform with the criteria set out in subparagraph 2, together with a report indicating the number, extent, and nature of the government's proposed redactions which were disagreed with, to the clerk of the committee. And 5, the clerk of the committee shall cause the documents provided by the law clerk and parliamentary council pursuant to subparagraph 4 to be distributed to the members of the committee forthwith upon receipt. And so that is the motion, but I have now put on notice. And with that, I'd like to now adjourn debate on the motion on the table.
Okay, so colleagues, we have a motion to adjourn the motion put forward by Madame Romanato at the sub-amendment stage. If I understand the motion you're putting forward correctly, Mr. Cooper, just give me one moment to, on the entire piece to check with the clerk, okay? Yeah, sorry, this is adjournment of debate on the entirety of the motion. This will go to a vote right away, colleagues.
But I seek recognition after.
Okay. Colleagues, I am going to ask the clerk in a moment to call the vote on the adjournment of this particular motion.
Sorry, point of order. There is a motion on the floor that there is no debate. It needs to be called.
Sorry, Ms. O'Connell, go ahead.
Sorry, there's a motion that
Yeah,
has been
yeah,
moved
you
and
are correct.
accepted. The vote must be called.
You are correct.
Monsieur Lauzon.
I've asked him to. He's called it.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Okay,
What are we
colleagues.
voting on?
We are voting on Mr. Cooper's motion, which calls to adjourn debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. This is non-debatable. We are voting immediately. I have asked the clerk to begin the roll call on that vote, and that is what he will do right away.
Monsieur Lauzon.
No.
Madame Fortier.
No.
Mr. Duguid. Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes?
Mr. Culkins.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold. Oui. Madame Gaudreau.
Oui?
Ms. Matheson.
No.
Yeah, we have 5 yeas and 5 nays.
So, colleagues, traditionally, in this point in time, it is the chair will vote to uphold the status quo. So I will be casting my vote no, and of course we will have a continuation of the debate on this motion, but Mr. Cooper has asked for the floor again. Mr. Calkins, is it a point of order?
No, I'm just asking to be put on the list.
Absolutely, no problem. So just for clarity, folks, Mr. Cooper, I'm going to respect his continuation because he had presented it. It was then Mr. Duncan, and I'm now seeing, then Mr. Calkins, and then Madame Matheson would be our speaking order. So, Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours. A reminder, colleagues, we are still in debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. Yes, on the sub-amendment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it is extremely disappointing to see once again the Liberals with their cover-up coalition ally, the NDP, blocking the work of this committee to get to the bottom of a matter that is about as serious as it gets and that must take priority, and that is the prima facie question of privilege involving 18 members of Parliament. Mr. Chair, 18 members of Parliament who for 2 years were kept in the dark that Beijing had launched a cyber attack against them, a progressive reconnaissance attack. There is only one reason why they found out. And they found out, notwithstanding that for 2 years the government had that information. And that is because the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China had seen an unsealed indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice in March of this year. That prompted IPAC to ask questions of the Department of Justice as well as the FBI as to why members of Parliament, not only the Canadian members of Parliament, but parliamentarians around the world, members of Congress who were targeted as part of a cyber attack, were not informed. And the answer provided by the Secretariat of IPAC is with respect to parliamentarians outside of the United States, that they had not directly been informed by the FBI or the Department of Justice due to jurisdictional issues. But the FBI indicated to the IPAC Secretariat that in 2022, early 2022, that information had been passed along to each of the governments of which those countries of which those members of Parliament were from. And so that included the government of Canada being informed by the FBI in the early part of 2022. And it was more specifically the Communications Security Establishment that had received that information, that 18 sitting members of Parliament had been targeted, all of whom were members of IPAC. And that prompted or resulted in IPAC then briefing certain of the Canadian members of Parliament that they had been the target of this cyber attack, and that the government of Canada had not informed them of that fact. And so it was subsequent to that there was a report in the Globe and Mail a few weeks ago. And so what we have is a situation where the government knew for 2 years that members of Parliament were the target of foreign interference by the Beijing-based communist regime, and those members unacceptably found out about it either through IPAC as a result of an unsealed indictment of the U.S. Department of Justice, or they read about it for the first time in the Globe and Mail. This is part of a pattern. We, on this committee, just completed a study on another question of privilege, a prima facie question of privilege, that was reported to this House almost exactly a year ago, involving the Member of Parliament, our colleague, Michael Chong, the member for Wellington Halton Hills. Just as these 18 members of Parliament were kept in the dark, that they were being targeted by the Beijing communist regime, that Michael Chong was kept in the dark, and just like these 18 members of Parliament, he was kept in the dark for 2 years. Just like these 18 members of Parliament, Mr. Chong did not find out by way of a briefing as a result of any transparency on the part of this government to alert him that he and his family were being threatened by none other than an accredited Beijing diplomat at Beijing's Toronto consulate, a diplomat that had been accredited and continued to be accredited by these liberals across the way, by their government. No, he found out about it by speaking with Stephen Chase or Robert Fife on the eve of a report that they wrote in the Globe and Mail. And what we have seen in this instance, just like in what happened to Michael Chong, was this Liberal government and this Prime Minister refusing to accept responsibility. They're the government, but somehow they're never responsible. They're never responsible for anything, according to them. They blame, they always talk about lessons learned.
Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper. Ms. O'Connor on a point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper is speaking to a motion that we are not on, and I would suggest that he get back to the topic of the motion at hand, which is about harassment.
I am speaking.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper, just one moment. I'll address that. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Cooper, I think we went through this a little bit in the last meeting. I'm sure you're getting to things that are relevant to that. So I'll turn the floor back to you.
It is relevant to the motion because it's relevant to the issue of prioritization. And that is the heart of the sub-amendment that I had put forward to Ms. Matheson's amendment. And as I was saying, this government, in this instance, with respect to this failure to inform members of parliament and that of what happened to Mr. Chong, the response from these Liberals is that they're not responsible, even though they are the government. It's always someone else's fault. In the case of Mr. Chong, it was asserted that it was CSIS's fault. In fact, the Prime Minister even went so far as to claim he had no idea until he saw it in the Globe and Mail. And then he said, well, when that turned out not to be the case, he said, well, CSIS, or rather, sorry, he said let me rephrase that. When he first said he learned about it in the Globe and Mail, he doubled down on that, saying that CSIS had made a decision not to brief him on it because CSIS had deemed it not important enough to bring it up to the Prime Minister. That turned out to be false because it was then revealed that CSIS had provided that warning that MP Chong and his family were being targeted by the Beijing-based communist regime to the Prime Minister's department, the PCO, and of course we later learned that CSIS had sent an earlier IMU to the Minister of Public Safety, his Chief of Staff, and the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, the current Minister of National Defense, Bill Blair. And then the Prime Minister actually tried to blame Michael Chong himself, falsely claiming that Michael Chong had been briefed when Michael Chong had not been briefed. The briefings that Michael Chong had received from CSIS were of a general nature. So, as far as I know, there has never been an acknowledgement by the Prime Minister or by Bill Blair that there was a failure on their part. In terms of intelligence, warnings from CSIS that are about as serious as they get, that ought to have taken priority. That was supported by the testimony of CSIS, the director of CSIS, David Bino, who said that when we send an IMU, we being CSIS, that is because it is a matter of high importance, and who an IMU is sent to, we send it because it's a matter that we want them to have on their desk. It's something they need to see. Well, and in the case of MP Chong being targeted and his family being targeted, I can see why CSIS would have prioritized
point d'ordre,
that.
s'il vous plaît.
Sorry, Mr. Cooper, 1 minute.
Encore une
Madame
fois,
Fortier.
je pense qu'on dérive vraiment de la conversation du sous-amendement
I think we're
tellement.
really getting away from that point of order. I don't even remember what the sub-amendment was. If it would be possible for Mr. Cooper to please remind us what is the sub-amendment so that I can try to get an understanding, because I'm really a little bit, I find that we're really getting very far away from the subject of the sub-amendment, and I would like to return the sub-amendment, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chair, notwithstanding the fact I just heard instructions given to Mr. Duguid from the Liberal Party whip to call points of order to try and move my colleague off of his game, I will say this. The issue that's before this is the work plan of the committee. This is committee business. We're basically talking about what this committee ought to be studying, whether we're in the amendment, or the main motion, the amendment, or the sub-amendment. And great latitude is always given for members of parliament to discuss any of the priorities in the work plan that this committee would have. I think my colleague, Mr. Cooper, is completely in order to discuss not only within the context of his sub-amendment, but the broader overall agenda of the work plan of this committee. And frankly, I'm not going to fault anybody for using whatever strategies or tactics they want to use, as long as everything's following the rules, and you're doing an excellent job so far, Mr. Chair, in administering the rules, insofar as we're in our second meeting. But I would hope that colleagues would have enough respect for the general traditions and practices of this place within the context of the rules, that we can talk during committee business and the schedule and planning of this committee about any of the motions, generally speaking, that would be a priority as we try and triage our way forward and come to a solution as to what this committee will study next. And I think everything is fair game in that context, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Calkins. Mr. Cooper, if you're willing to oblige, I did hear, I think, Madame Fortier just asking if you could repeat what your sub-amendment was for the purposes of clarity on the part of the committee. If you're open to that, Mr. Cooper, perhaps it's helpful. It'll help us move along. And then, of course, you maintain the floor, and you can continue to talk on this as you wish.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yes, for members who should have my sub-amendment before them, because it has been distributed through the clerk to all members, that it would amend Ms. Matheson's amendment to Ms. Romanato's motion in two ways. First, that it would prioritize this committee's study on foreign election interference before taking up the study proposed in Ms. Romanato's motion. And secondly, it would remove the requirement that the study proposed by Ms. Romanato be completed and reported back to the House by October 31st, 2024. It would remove that date. So that is what my sub-amendment provides for. And in speaking to the sub-amendment, to the broader issue of prioritization, which also has to be what happened last evening, what has happened in the House moments ago, have to be part of the discussion in order to appropriately deal with the motion before us, the sub-amendment, and more broadly, the motion put forward by Ms. Romanato from the standpoint of prioritization. And in that regard, I would note that in the case of MP Chong, there was a study of this committee, and we did find that Mr. Chong's privileges had been breached.
Just, Mr. Cooper, 1 minute. Colleagues, I'm trying to focus on what Mr. Cooper is saying, and that's difficult with conversation happening across the table. So I would ask that members simply meet in person as the speaker that has the floor is expressing themselves. It would be very helpful for both myself as the chair, the speaker, as well as the interpreters. So if we can please have those conversations in person, away from the microphones, that would be helpful. Madame Fortier, Madame Gautreau, I'm trying to make this point that we don't do this, please. Okay? Thank you. Merci. Monsieur Cooper?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just as the Prime Minister and these Liberals refused to take responsibility of any kind for what this committee in its report determined was in fact a breach of the privileges of the member for Wellington Halton Hills, Mr. Chong, we see the same posture from this Liberal government in respect of the failure of this Liberal government to inform the 18 members of Parliament that the Speaker, of which the Speaker has now found a prima facie question of privilege in regards to that failure. The position taken by the Liberals since it came to light that these MPs were targeted is that this was something that was referred to the House of Commons administration, and therefore it was a failure of the House of Commons administration that these 18 members of Parliament were not informed. That is a completely unacceptable response. That does not excuse the Liberals at all from this failure. It is fine and well that House of Commons administration was informed about this progressive reconnaissance attack targeting these 18 MPs, but it's not up to House of Commons administration, it's not up to the IT department in the House of Commons to brief MPs that they are the target of a hostile foreign state. It is the responsibility of this Liberal government. And that didn't happen. And that is a significant failure, and it would never have happened but for the fact that there was an unsealed indictment of the Department of Justice and a report in the Globe and Mail. Otherwise, those members of Parliament would continue to be kept in the dark. And why is it important that they be informed? Well, I would submit that members of Parliament should be informed when they are the target of a hostile foreign state and when their own government has that information. Members of Parliament need to know. It has or could have a serious impact on our ability, our colleagues' abilities to do our jobs. It could impact our safety, and not only our safety, but the safety of our families, our staff, our constituents, and others who we interact with, including human rights activists, members of diaspora communities who have been the subject of being targeted, intimidated, and threatened by hostile foreign states like the Beijing-based communist regime. Given the nature of the cyber attack, it was an attack that was a fairly low-level attack, but it was one that was designed to get key information about the 18 members, and it was progressive in nature. And so if members had been informed, they could have taken steps to work with the government, to work with the security and intelligence establishment, to take measures to protect themselves, their families, and so on. But that didn't happen. They had no idea. And the second excuse offered as to why they were not briefed after blaming House of Commons administration was that the attack was not successful. Well, with respect, Mr. Chair, that ought not to be the standard, that the attack was not successful. Again, all members ought to know whether they are being targeted by a hostile foreign state or any foreign state when our government has that information. It's good that the attack wasn't successful, but that doesn't in any way negate or limit the right of those members to have been made aware. And I would make the observation that if a member knew that they were the target of a cyber attack, one that wasn't ultimately successful by the Beijing-based communist regime, it certainly would cause me to, if I were one of those members, to take extra vigilance in recognizing that clearly I had a target on my back by the Beijing-based communist regime. I would want to know that. Because if they had targeted me once, it would be quite logical that they would target me again, and quite logical that they would target those members again. And that begs the question, if this is the approach that this government has taken, which is to keep members in the dark, blame everyone else when they get caught, not keeping members in the dark, and saying, well, if it's, by the way, it wasn't fully successful, so therefore we can wash our hands clean of any responsibility, it begs the question, how many other cyber attacks by hostile foreign states, such as the Beijing-based regime, such as the Iranian regime, have been targeted against members of parliament, maybe members in this committee room?
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I think I alluded at the last meeting to the fact that I'm a big believer in health breaks, the necessity for people to stretch their legs. Of course, you don't lose your slot on the floor. I'm going to, should you or whomever else be speaking still in 5 minutes, may suspend just for 5 minutes to let people stretch their legs, and we will absolutely resume debate with whomever has the floor at that point. So I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Fine.
So at about 12 o'clock, I'll do a health break, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
How many members have been targeted, whether it be by way of a cyber attack or in other ways? We know that ever since President Xi took office in Beijing, that there has been a significant escalation in cyber attacks, in the targeting of diaspora communities, of interference activities, and in more broader terms, an aggressive posture taken towards Canada, the United States, and our allies. And so, in that context, it is also troubling that members were kept in the dark in light of the nature of the regime that we are dealing with here. A regime that has interfered in our elections, that has illegally set up police stations that violate our sovereignty and threaten the safety and security of Chinese Canadians, a regime that infiltrated Canada's highest security lab in Winnipeg, that resulted in the transfer of sensitive materials to Beijing-based institutions, including the transfer of two of the most deadly pathogens, Ebola and Hennepin, a regime that arbitrarily arrested two Canadians, the two Michaels Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, a regime that threatened the safety and security of 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong, and a regime that has imposed a series of punitive trade measures against Canada, not to mention a regime that is committing genocide against its own people, including Uyghur Muslims, and a regime that has, for more than 20 years, targeted Falun Dafa practitioners because they dare stand for the principles of compassion, tolerance, and forbearance. And I could go on, Mr. Chair, but I think it is important to highlight that to capture the significant threat posed by the Beijing regime, it is a regime that poses a threat to our democracy, to our sovereignty, and the safety and security of our people. And in the face of that, and with the government being fully aware of that, how is it that members of parliament, 18 members of parliament, were kept in the dark? How is it possible that the 18 members of parliament were kept in the dark, notwithstanding the cabinet directive issued in May of 2023 that members of parliament be informed? Why were they not, at the very least, informed following the issuance of that directive? And we know the Liberals issued that directive only after they got caught keeping Michael Chong in the dark for 2 years, that Michael Chong's family and that Michael Chong was being targeted by the Beijing regime, including an accredited diplomat, a diplomat that remained accredited for 2 years to intimidate Chinese Canadians when this government knew of his activities. It was damage control. And it raises the question about the directive, whether it's just a piece of paper. What good is a directive if it isn't followed, if it isn't implemented? It seems that the directive hasn't been implemented. And when we speak about prioritization, which is the heart of the sub-amendment, I find it astounding that the NDP would join the Liberals this morning after the House referred this question, prima facie question of privilege, to our committee, after the member for Vancouver East, who herself was targeted, gave an impassioned speech in the House an hour ago, that they would join the Liberals in blocking this committee from prioritizing and taking up that prima facie question of privilege. I spoke in the House last evening around 11 o'clock, and the member for Churchill asked me, she asked the member for Calgary Shepherd, Mr. Kimmich, who was himself one of the 18 members targeted, about would we just end the debate in the House so that we could get it over to PROC, so that PROC could get down to work, commence a study. Well, Mr. Chair, and I know you want to have a health break, but just, if I may, just conclude, and I will continue my remarks after the break, but when that happened this morning. The House voted unanimously to refer it to Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I attempted at the first opportunity, upon the motion being referred to this committee, to do what the NDP had asked last night, which was for this committee to prioritize and immediately take up the motion that had been put forward referred to this committee. And what did the NDP do? They voted against that. They joined the Liberals, who have every intention of covering up this massive failure that occurred under their watch. It's absolutely shameful, and it demonstrates that the NDP is all talk and no action, and at the end of the day, they are complicit in the cover-up efforts of this government. And it's just disgraceful. They're going to have to answer at the next election for that and any number of times that they have worked to collaborate with this government
Mr.
that is
Cooper, I
causing
think-
enormous damage to this country.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. I recognize you will maintain the floor. Colleagues, as mentioned 7 minutes ago now, and as reminded by my watch, it's time to stretch. So we're going to take a quick break for everybody's mental and physical health. We're going to suspend briefly. We'll come back in 5 minutes. Okay, colleagues, we're going to resume. Before I turn the floor over to Mr. Cooper to resume his debate on the motion, I just want to point out that as members, we have the luxury of being able to kind of stand up and walk around and talk in the hall if we need to. Not all of the staff from the House administration have the privilege of doing that. They have to stay in their seats and be attentive to what's happening. So the health break is in part for them as well. And I think it's important that we are mindful of the fact that it's not just members in the room, but others as well. So this will be something that is not uncommon if we end up in long periods of time without breaks. But with that, Mr. Cooper, the floor resumes for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And what we're seeing this morning is part of what we have seen for the past year and a half on this committee, which is obstruction by the Liberals to thwart the ability of this committee to get to the bottom of failures on the part of this Liberal government with respect to foreign interference that has attacked our democracy, our elections, and interference that has targeted our colleagues, whether it be Mr. Chong or the 18 members who we now know were the subject of a cyber attack. And it is what we see from these Liberals is they say they're very concerned about this. They even went along with giving unanimous consent to send this over to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. And all I wanted to do this morning was to, in light of that, have this committee get to work to schedule hearings. And what did the Liberals with the NDP do when they have an opportunity to do that? Suddenly it's not a priority. Suddenly it's all about themselves again. That they want to make it a priority about themselves, not the failure that occurred, the breach of the privileges of other colleagues, and to see that there is accountability, because there needs to be accountability. We need to know who it is that we're aware of the information that had been provided by the FBI to the communication security establishment, and why those members, following that information being provided, were kept in the dark, and why it took a foreign government and an unsealed indictment from the U.S. Justice Department and a report in the Globe and Mail for this to come to light. The Prime Minister famously said that sunshine is the best disinfectant. But when it comes to Beijing's interference in our democracy and in our sovereignty, this Prime Minister's record has been one of being anything but transparent. Canadians deserve better, and frankly, our colleagues, all of us, deserve better insofar as this could happen to any one of us. And for all we know, one or more of us have been the subject of these types of attacks and kept in the dark. And in order to address that broader concern, we need to get to the bottom of what happened in this particular instance involving these 18 MPs. So I will have more to say, Mr. Chair, so I'd ask to be put to the bottom of the list, but I will leave it at that for now as I look forward to the comments of my other colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Colleagues, again, I did this the other day because there's been some time that has passed since we last talked about the list. I'll just remind colleagues of where we're at. It will be Mr. Duncan, followed by Monsieur Berthold, Calkins, Matheson, and Cooper again. Mr. Duncan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to take an opportunity to build on what my colleague, Mr. Cooper, said. We are increasingly seeing, not just in the House, but in several committees, including multiple times here at the House and Procedural Affairs Committee, a record that the NDP has, frankly, of saying one thing and when it comes to a vote, doing the opposite. I want to read into the record. Actually, I want to give a bit of a background of what's happened so far today. Mr. Cooper gave a notice of motion regarding the question of privilege that was just passed within the last about hour or so now from the House of Commons being referred to PROC to study another question of privilege around the issue of foreign interference, this time not just on one specific member, but 18 members of Parliament from many different political parties that were affected by the issue. Mr. Cooper asked to adjourn the debate that we are currently undertaking. The sub-amendment that Mr. Cooper has on the amendment of Ms. Matheson about Ms. Romanato's main motion. It seems like the NDP complained to say that would defeat the motion. For those Canadians that are watching, adjourning debate on a motion does not defeat it. It puts it back in the proverbial parking lot and allows another issue to come forward, particularly the notice of motion that Mr. Cooper has that the House was just seized with for several hours this morning and last night. The NDP refused to adjourn the debate to allow discussion about the question of privilege and to move forward on that study. Let's make it very clear what happened there. I want to take a moment. I've got the transcripts from last night, particularly, of what the NDP was saying in the floor of the House of Commons about the priority and importance of moving forward with this question of privilege and a study on it. The Speaker took the floor last night about 8:20 p.m. and ruled on the question of privilege raised on April 29th, 2024 by the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. Fast forward of different colleagues in the chamber making comments. And it was the NDP House Leader, Mr. Julian, on one of his first interventions, and I will read into the record what the NDP said in the House of Commons. I always listen attentively to my colleague. I think in this case it is very, very clear, as we've seen with Justice Hoag's preliminary report, which points to very clearly to some things. There is a real shortcoming in terms of how the government and past governments have dealt with the information around foreign interference. We've seen repeatedly from the 2019 and 2021 election that information was not communicated to candidates. In this case, addressed in the question of privilege, information was not communicated to members of Parliament. There's a lack of protocols and a lack of organization, not necessarily around the obtaining of information, but in actually communicating that information to people who might be impacted. This may be members of Parliament, or as we saw in election campaigns, candidates. We need to ensure that actions taken to prevent further interference of this type. Go on. Mr. Julian get up a little bit later. Quote from Mr. Julian, the NDP House Leader, and it's the NDP Deputy House Leader that sits on this committee. But Mr. Julian said last night, Mr. Speaker, quote, Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by saying that we see this matter, this question of privilege, and the motion before the House of Commons as important. We will therefore support this motion so that it can be adopted as quickly as possible. In this whole matter, this question of privilege can be referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs as quickly as possible. Okay. Then Mr. Julian says a few minutes later, I believe it's an exchange of a back and forth, but in questions and comments, quote, there is systematic pattern of the government erring in how it potentially gets information to candidates during an election or to members of Parliament. That needs to change. That is why we need to refer this to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to come up with protocols and suggestions for actions, unquote. Just last night. In response to the Bloc Québécois and questions and comments, Mr. Julian of the NDP said the following, quote, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for the question. It is precisely for that reason that the NDP moved the motion that led to the public inquiry. Further on, we believe, quote, we believe that we should act in the national interest and think first about how we do everything we can do to prevent foreign interference in our politics, in our democracy, in our elections. He goes on to further state, there are many things we can do, and it starts tonight with referring the motion to the Standing Committee on House and Procedural Affairs. Then Mr. Lamoureux gets up and asks a question or comment. Mr. Julian of the NDP responds, and I'll say, quote, that is why I suggest to all members tonight that we need to refer this to PROC promptly and not to take a day or two to talk about it. The time for talk is over. It needs to be referred to PROC for action. That, coupled with the Hogue Inquiry or Hogue Commission, hopefully gives us all the things we need to put in place to fully protect our democracy in any future election. Goes on again. In response to an exchange with Mrs. Kuzi, he asks her a question, quote, Mr. Speaker, would the honourable member agree with me that this needs to be referred promptly this evening to Procedure and House Affairs to come up with recommendations? Not done yet. There's more. Mr. Julian had a lot to say, a lot of passion about PROC taking this up and beginning deliberations and recommendations and study into this question of privilege. Actually, Ms. Ashton took the floor of the NDP last night a couple of times. I'm going to quote what she said. NDP said this last night in the floor of the House of Commons when the effort to bring forward Mr. Cooper's motion to get the ball rolling, the NDP blocked it. But here's what Ms. Ashton said last night in the House of Commons. Quote, Mr. Speaker, given the severity of issues like this, would the member agree that sending the matter to PROC, it is obviously the body that is best equipped to deal with it. Would the member agree that it should be sent to PROC as soon as possible? Ms. Ashton took the floor a little while later. Quote, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that this issue merits proper examination. At this hour, we've heard from many speakers that this must be taken seriously. Will the member agree that this should be referred to PROC as soon as possible? Obviously, we gathered here to debate C-59, which has issues of great importance to the citizens we represent. Will the member agree to, here's her words again, this is continuing the quote, to speeding up the process and moving this to PROC as soon as possible? Ms. Ashton took the floor again last night. Member of the NDP. It's unbelievable, their advocacy, their passion on the floor of the House of Commons. Ms. Ashton says, quote, would it not be in all of our interest to have this dealt with by PROC as soon as possible? Will the member agree to send this matter to PROC as soon as possible so we can actually move on this? And it goes on. Ms. Kwan from the NDP spoke this morning very passionately in the House. The motion was unanimously adopted. Referred to here, Mr. Cooper tabled the notice of motion, attempted to have that brought forward, and it was blocked. So, Mr. Chair, I, at the beginning of my comments, confirmed to alleviate the concern of Ms. Matheson that adjourning the debate we are currently undertaking does not defeat it, but what it would allow to do, as Mr. Julian, as Ms. Ashton, many members, Ms. Kwan, many members of the NDP have said numerous times in recent days that this should be the issue as soon as possible to be dealt with at PROC and by PROC. The motion was defeated, so we cannot discuss how we move forward and study this important question of privilege. So if the NDP truly says one thing in the floor of the House of Commons, and they have a record of they say one thing, they talk tough, they're all challenging, and they're frustrated with the Liberal record of all of this. And then they vote a completely different way, siding to cover up and block with the Liberals many times. So now that I've clarified that we are adjourning so we can bring up the issue that were there, Mr. Chair, now we have that all clarified. Now that we have into the record several members of the NDP on record in the House last night when the cameras were on and people were watching, talking about this. The cameras are still on here. I move to adjourn debate in order for Mr. Cooper's motion to be brought up, please. Move to adjourn. I move to adjourn debate.
Okay. Mr. Duncan, can you please repeat and clarify for our
To
benefit?
adjourn to the debate.
Okay, so colleagues, we know how this goes. We are going to vote on this immediately. This is the same vote that we held a little while back. The question is whether or not we are going to adjourn debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. Mr. Clerk, I will ask that you call the vote.
Monsieur Lauzon,
No?
Madame Fortier,
No.
Mr. Duguid,
No.
Monsieur Drouin,
Eric?
No.
You want to keep the floor?
Ms. Romanato,
No.
Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Culkins,
Yeah.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Monsieur Berthold,
Oui.
Madame Gaudreau,
Oui.
Ms. Matheson.
No.
5
Okay.
yeas, 6 nays.
Colleagues, we have 5 yeas and 6 nays, so the debate continues. Mr. Duncan, should you wish, the floor remains yours.
I've got another quote from the NDP last night. If I could continue with that. We just saw the NDP block for a second time, despite what they said in the floor of the House of Commons, despite all of the things as soon as possible that this needs to be discussed and move forward on. They're blocking the opportunity to move forward specifically on the question of privilege that was unanimously just passed on the floor of the House of Commons with support by the NDP. It was their whip, Ms. McPherson, that was raised on the NDP whip's intervention on the question of privilege. Quote, Mr. Speaker, I would like to comment on the point of privilege that was brought forward earlier today by the member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. The New Democratic Party is very concerned about the recent news that members of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China could have been or were the targets of cyber attacks from hackers who were linked to Beijing. I'm a member of IPAC and I'm deeply concerned because I do not know the details. I do not have the information I need to know whether my personal emails were hacked or whether there were cyber attacks made against me, other members of the New Democratic Party, or indeed any member of this House. I'm concerned this information came forward from the U.S. government, and our government did not provide that information to legislators. I'm concerned because this is not the first time I have felt that the government has withheld information from members of Parliament from legislators. I think back as well to a time when when members of the Subcommittee on International Rights were called out and sanctioned by the Chinese government. As a member of that committee, I found all of this out on Twitter. There was no support provided to me as a parliamentarian by the government, and I find that unacceptable. I also find it unacceptable that it seems we are repeatedly having to ask the government of the day to provide the information to parliamentarians that they need to do their work. We do not know what the government of Canada knows. We do not know when they knew it, and we do not know why it did not alert those members who may have been impacted by this work. And then she wraps up here to say, actually, legislators need to have this information. They need to be able to feel they are protected. They need to be able to feel they are safe doing their work. And lastly, she says here, quote, I do believe this constitutes a violation of parliamentarians' privilege, and it is vitally important that we get to the bottom of it. So vitally important, so as quickly as possible, pass it now so it can go to PROC, Mr. Chair, that we had the NDP align with the Liberals to block it twice. And to clarify, Mr. Cooper had a notice of motion, a great notice of motion, a great motion in itself that talks about a scope of how we can address the question of privilege. And the NDP blocked it from even being discussed. That tells you everything you need to know about the NDP. The Liberals, we know, they want to cover up. It makes them extremely uncomfortable to have to talk about the issue and their record of foreign interference. Because there are many, many examples of them covering up and not providing information. I literally just read quotes of the NDP within the last 24 hours complaining about the exact same thing. And twice now, the NDP, despite the House Leader in the House of Commons advocating for PROC to take this up as quickly as possible, at the first opportunity that comes up, they block it twice. This is ridiculous. The committee needs to move forward on this discussion, this question of privilege, this issue of foreign interference. This should be the issue, the number one priority that PROC deals with right now. Mr. Chair, I'll have more to say and ask to be added to the bottom of the list, but I know Mr. Boutreau, my colleague, has some comments to say as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. You are correct, Monsieur Berthold. I think I got it right this time. À vous, monsieur.
Félicitations, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que vous avez effectivement...
Congratulations, Mr. Chair. I think you're, no doubt, you've had to work very hard to pronounce my name correctly, and I thank you for that. Mr. Chair, it's my turn to take the floor. I'm a bit surprised to see how events are unfolding this morning, Mr. Chair, especially that we haven't given all of the parties to take an opportunity to take a break so that we could discuss the agenda of the committee's business in the next few days. And twice since the beginning of today's meeting, there was a proposal to defer the debate on Mrs. Romano's motion. What does this mean? Well, in the end, we've sidelined it, and the idea is, can we come back to this? And it's usually not something that conservatives like to do. When you adjourn debate, they don't usually like that because they're not a majority around the table in the committee. You can't bring back the debate because ever you want to bring a debate that was adjourned at our initiative, one has to have a majority of members who will agree to resume debate. So that is the situation we find ourselves in. Conservatives don't like this. But at this point, what we are seeing is that the adjournment of debate has been refused by those who hold a majority here around the table. This debate could be brought to a vote as soon as a member of the government or of the NDP takes the floor and tables a motion asking that we resume the debate, and that would be it. So, Mr. Chair, when we're speaking about how important it is to take the floor, again, I know I'm being quite wordy, and I've just begun. This is just the beginning. Mr. Bertot?
And you've indicated you may talk for a little bit more. Colleagues, out of respect to your schedules and your schedulers, because I know that things move quickly, I do want you to know, because it seems as though there's still a fair amount for us to work through as a committee, I have asked for resources, and we've been granted resources to continue till 2 o'clock. So I'm interrupting Monsieur Berthold just right now so that you have a chance to plan your schedules between when we were supposed to end the meeting at 1 o'clock. We will continue until 2, and then we'll reevaluate where we're at 2 o'clock. So with that, Monsieur Berthold, la parole est encore avec vous.
Monsieur Berthold, vous avez encore la parole. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's very kind to warn us that we will have an opportunity to speak until 2 p.m., but I would prefer not to do that. Mr. Chair, what I would prefer is that we come to a common sense solution. That is, we adjourn debate on this motion so that we can take advantage of the time we have in order to discuss the next steps and that we can begin the study which was requested by the House of Commons following the issue of privilege, involving 18 of our colleagues who were the victims of an IT attack from a foreign power. I'd like us to do that and that we do not take up these resources uselessly from the House until 2 p.m. But it seems that the NDP, despite everything that was said in the House yesterday, does not want to do this. And that worries me a great deal because we heard statements, and I was listening this morning to Jenny Kwan's speech. It was truly a very well thought through speech about the fact that she and others were victims of foreign interference through the hacking of their email accounts. And to her mind, it was blatantly obvious that as quickly as possible, we would need to focus on this motion of privilege to PROC. But Nikki Ashton, who's part of the NDP caucus from the Churchill Kewanaski riding, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, who stated by putting a question to Mr. Faison, my questions, and I'll read that question now. Mr. Chair, given the seriousness of this issue, would the member accept to refer this issue to the Procedures Committee? It's the NDP who put in that request last night during the debate. So clearly, this is the best body to address the issue, and would the member agree that this question would be referred to the Procedures Committee as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker? As soon as possible. So we're given this opportunity as soon as the House of Commons unanimously adopted this motion. That is, the Conservatives did this. The Bloc also voted for this motion to refer this to the PROC. NDP also voted in favor of the motion to bring the issue of privilege back to the PROC. Independent MPs as well voted in favor. Everybody agreed that PROC quickly study this issue because it is such an important issue. So we were given the opportunity to do this. Now, unfortunately, and I don't know for whichever reason, whether it be political, partisan, or others, we don't quite know why. Mr. Chairman, the Liberals are refusing to adjourn a debate so that we can move to this important debate, this issue. And what's even more surprising is that the NDP is also refusing this. They're refusing to adjourn a debate, to set it aside for 2 minutes, so that we can speak to our calendar to see how we work things out over the next few weeks, how do we organize our witnesses, and how we're going to proceed. So as quickly as possible, we can then address the issue of privilege. And as I mentioned, Mr. Chair, the NDP that proposed an amendment to the Liberals' amendment can at any time, as soon as I take the floor at any time, bring back debate on Ms. Romanato's motion. Why? Because they have the numbers on their sides. I know numbers and the Liberals don't always work well together, but that's a whole other story, and I'm going to not start another debate because, again, you could call me to order for that, for all kinds of reasons. This said, however, Mr. Chairman, the numbers are all telling, and we could come quickly back to the debate. If one day, let's say, we don't have any witnesses or the witnesses to speak to the issue of privilege are not there, we have many opportunities before us, enabling us to move forward and to do what is right and important both for the House of Commons, which has asked this committee to, as quickly as possible, commence study on the issue of privilege, and as well regarding other topics that the members of this committee would like to address and that are absolutely reasonable. We're not against the motion tabled by the Liberals. Well, perhaps we could move some amendments to the content. We might have some amendments to make as to how this will be brought forward. We don't disagree, but we would be prepared to begin the study. But in the meantime, Mr. Chair, since Tuesday, when we had the decision by the Speaker of the House of Commons, who recognized the relevance of the issue of privilege that was raised by Sherwood Park, Mr. Garnaccinis in Saskatchewan. We spent the whole evening debating it. All of the parliamentarians that I heard and those that I listened to agreed that this was an issue of importance, that is the interference of the Beijing regime in our system, in our parliament, in our election systems. Everybody wants PROC to study this as quickly as possible. It is up to the members of this committee to see how to do this as best as possible, at what pace, and which witnesses we'd like to hear, and how we will proceed. I cannot understand, simply don't see why the Liberals wish to prevent this at this time. Truly, I don't follow. Because when you're in the House, everybody agrees, and then we're here in order to specifically address this issue and to debate. And then we have a government NDP Liberal coalition that decides to vote against us. So that is a fact. And it really is an important issue. The question before us is important. Through the FBI, we learned that Canadian members of parliament were the targets of Chinese IT hacking in 2021. Just imagine. And it is not the FBI that communicated with us. We learned it through the newspapers because the newspapers found out through the FBI that parliamentarians in the House were the target of Chinese computer hacking in 2021. It seems to me that somebody in Canada had been notified. Somebody in Canada, either from the government or somebody from the House of Commons, must have been informed. And that is why we need to conduct a study to identify who received that information, who was notified, and when. And as we saw with Mr. Chong regarding the study we've just completed, that was another question of privilege. The members were the last to find out. This is completely unacceptable. That MPs, that elected representatives from their different ridings across the country, because they spoke to such an important issue like foreign interference, or that they decided to defend individuals from diaspora, whether this be the Chinese diaspora or the Ukrainians, regardless of whom, that because they decided to speak out on behalf of citizens who live here in Canada, that they are the target of foreign interference, that IT hacking, as was the case raised by Mr. Garnaccinis, who was very shocked to learn in the newspapers that there had been this IT hacking attempt. Was there damage done? We don't know. What were the effects? We don't know. Has information been disclosed? We're told there wasn't any. I don't know because nobody has told me. And I think that it behooves the committee to get to the bottom of things, to ask the right questions to the right people, to get clarity on this issue, and to ensure that Canadian parliamentarians are not the target of these cyber attacks from a foreign power, and if so, that they be made aware of it, and that they are kept in the dark when this works in somebody else's interest, but that they find out as soon as it happens. Because we saw in the foreign interference file that the decision to inform the political parties or the MPs was not done by CSIS or RCMP. This was a group of individuals who had to assess the information that they had received, and they came together and said, oh, well, maybe that might be it, or no, that doesn't quite reach the level of importance that we had set, so we won't notify immediately. As a result, we all learned after the fact. We saw this. And Madam Justice's Hogue report that we received last week was also clear regarding the entire process that needs to be reviewed. And I believe that the PROC committee, just as my colleague said so correctly, and I think had met 70 times to speak about foreign interference, which illustrates how important this was for the committee. It also illustrates how important foreign interference has been for the members of the committee. A number of the members have been here since the beginning. Some came, others left, because with 70 meetings, that's a great deal of meetings. But we can't stop there, because foreign interference has not stopped. If miraculous, we were to say, yes, Commissioner Hogue, and we had her, and by appointing her with a magic wand, suddenly all of foreign powers would say, including China, would say, oh, Canadians have appointed a commissioner, we have to stop everything. We have to stop doing foreign interference. And that didn't happen. And it won't happen. And that's why it's important for us to better protect it. The government needs to make the right decisions, and that is why we need to look carefully at Bill 70 when it's referred to committee, Mr. Chair. This is one of the main roles held by the Procedure Committee of the House to have oversight over these rules. Justice Hogue, in a motion tabled before the House of Commons, asked us to produce a report, an interim report. Why was this asked? Not only to make her work, but it is to quickly as possible and as much as possible learn about this as elections approach. Why is this so urgent? Well, because we are facing a supposed minority government. So as long as the government is a coalition government with the NDP, there will not be an election. But can we know when the NDP intends to withdraw its support from the Liberals? I've heard Liberals say and hope that this never occurs. I have some news for you. When it comes time for the NDP to drop you, they will drop you. No worries. Or rather, perhaps you should be worried, because you have risked it all. But those are the facts. We're dealing with a minority government that has the support of the NDP, and that at this time controls or tries to control the agenda of what people will be informed about or not with respect to foreign interference. That is unacceptable. This brings me back to Justice Hogue's interim report. In this report, we learned a number of things. Justice Hogue confirmed what everybody already knew. Yes, there was foreign interference in the last two elections. Justice Hogue confirmed as well that foreign interference did not have any direct result on the overall election outcomes. The Conservatives have said, so everybody has said this. But we specifically learned that the claims of our colleague, Tinishu, that is the Pékin's regime and its 50 years of disinformation, had a major impact and possibly decisive impact on the outcome of its last election, which they lost. And this was well-founded. And in fact, there was evidence that demonstrated, yes, that there might have been an impact on the outcome of this election, Mr. Chair. And if Justice Hogue believed that it was appropriate to notify Canadian parliamentarians and the Canadian public with respect to the events prior to releasing her final report, there's a reason for this. She wants to ensure that this not occur again at the next election. And again, she realizes that this election could be called at any time. There's another important and worrisome element. And again, here I don't quite share the opinion of my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, That is the Chinese Communist government's interference. Point of order, Mr. Chair. It's not so much that I was mentioned, but I think we only have a few minutes left. No, in fact, we have more than an hour left because we have found the necessary resources to continue. So, to pursue the work, we need to consult the members. I was not consulted as to the feasibility. No, we don't need to consult. That is the privilege of the chair. Yes, I made my decision 30 minutes ago that we will be continuing. Thank you. Very well, Mr. Berthold. So I was speaking about my colleague. He was inquiring as to the length of this meeting, and I said that our opinions differ because earlier, as she spoke in this committee, she was speaking to my colleague's amendment and the sub-amendment by my colleague on the amendment tabled by the NTB on the Liberals' motion. That is, we should allow Justice Hogue to do her work and allow this interim report to be released without involvement. That is, we knew that Justice Hogue would be focusing on foreign interference. We should let all of this work carry out and allow Justice Hogue to complete her work. But that is not what the House asked for. What the House asked for is for a preliminary report and for a very specific reason. And the idea is to be able to prepare for a next election. And what Justice Hogue revealed, and I was in fact about to raise that, is that apparently that there has been interference by the Beijing Communist regime regarding the nomination of a candidate. In the case of our colleague Han Dong. So apparently the interference perpetrated by the Beijing regime had an impact on the choice of the candidate before he was elected, and Mr. Han Dong apparently took advantage of the support of being a citizen, that he was sworn in, and a citizen was brought there by representatives of the Chinese Communist regime who then voted for Mr. Han Dong. Now, the problem is that this is a riding that is very liberal. Since we have many conservative ridings in the West, and we have some conservative ridings here, we also have by-elections elsewhere, we realize that no doubt the result will be the same. This was a liberal riding. It remains a liberal riding. So why would a regime try to influence a regime in a country to get involved and to interfere in the nomination process of a candidate? Clearly, it's because they want to choose that member. And Justice Hogue raised that issue. But there was something Justice Hogue did not mention. We know that Mr. Dong was informed that CSIS was investigating interference as part of the nomination process during the election of Beijing's communist regime with respect to him. And since this is highly political and highly partisan, it's clear that Justice Hogue is not going to address this. Now, that is the responsibility of PROC. Analyzing the nomination process, how did this unfold, who was made aware. There were people who received that confidential secret information, and this was sent to a candidate to protect the individual. Mr. Chair, that is information indicating that Justice Hogue would not go further in her report. but it is important for us. For Canadian citizens, it is important to know who breached those laws and possibly undermined an investigation by CSIS in order to foster the election of a Liberal candidate in an election. And it's for this reason that my colleague's motion aims at ensuring that we address the issue of foreign interference prior to commencing a new study. And as I mentioned, we were prepared to commence the study. We were prepared to schedule meetings. And this was the outcome of Ms. Romano's motion. Again, last night, we heard this from the Speaker in the House of Commons. He agreed. He told our colleague, Mr. Garnaginius, look, the issue of privilege that you've raised is highly relevant. And in fact, it's a matter of privilege that requires the House of Commons holding a debate, and everything stopped. At the House of Commons, it was instantaneous. The Speaker rendered his decision, and immediately debate started to focus on the issue of privilege. During all of the evening here last night, and we began this morning as well, that is, as long as members continued to want to speak about it until we had unanimous motion for the House to refer this to PROC. My colleague, Mr. Cooper, as soon as this motion was made known, immediately asked this committee to suspend its work so that we could take over. It was immediate last night and as well this morning. And unfortunately, the government, that is, the government MPs, once again assisted by the NDP, wanted to, I don't quite know, I don't follow, I don't understand. I simply don't understand why on the one hand you're unanimous when we're in the House, and on the other hand here, they're voting against the fact that this study should be a priority. Mr. Chair, I'll stop here, but again, I'd like to give you time to go back to your seats because I am not quite done. I'm done. So I'll continue speaking on till the chair is back in his seat. So I'll stop shortly.
Je disais que j'arrête là mon intervention. Je vous demande de remettre mon nom à la fin de la liste,
OK,
s'il
M.
vous plaît.
Berthaud,
Merci.
désolé, merci.
Non, pas de problème.
On a une nouvelle équipe d'interpréteurs pour notre traduction, alors on doit suspendu pour...
We have a
We
new
have a new
team of
interpretation
interpreters
team
coming,
on
so we
site, so we have
to suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that they can get organized. Would you allow me to propose an adjournment motion in a minute? Because if we don't have access to both official languages in this debate, I don't want to continue. So just a moment.
Malheureusement, Monsieur Berthold, je dois...
Unfortunately, I have to suspend the meeting, and we'll continue in a few minutes.
Bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome back, everyone. Does it work? We have a new interpretation team. Is it working? Okay, great. Mr. Berthold, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to PROC, by the way. It's great to see that you're settling in. So, Mr. Chair, I have seen that there have been some attempts to discuss the matter between the parties, so I'm going to move that we adjourn debate so that we can talk about it amongst ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, Monsieur Berthold.
Mr. Berthold, You will probably clarify with no condition. That was a comment, Mr. Chair. I move that the debate on Ms. Romanaudo's motion now be adjourned. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
We, again, will be voting on whether or not to adjourn the motion presented by Madame Romanado. This is the same question that had been dealt with previously. I will now ask the clerk to call the vote.
No.
Mr. Collins.
Nope.
Mr. Duguid.
Nope.
Mr. Turnbull.
Nope.
McDonald.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Berthold.
Oui.
Mr. Desilets.
No.
Ms. Matheson.
No.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
Okay, colleagues, we have 4 yeas and 7 nays. Monsieur Berthold, est-ce que vous voulez continuer avec la parole?
Mr. Berthold, do you want to keep and continue? If you want me to, I can, but otherwise, did you finish? Okay.
Hawkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just preface my comments by reiterating what I said earlier. I think we have very good options before us as a committee. I don't believe that anybody is presenting any motions in bad faith or bad intent, but I do believe that we have to make the best decision possible as committee members as to what this very busy, very important committee ought to be studying as a matter of priority and triage accordingly. We here on the Conservative side, I think, will continue making that case for as long as it takes, because we believe that foreign interference, which is, I believe, one of what I would consider to be 3 matters that are being discussed, notwithstanding the sub-amendment portion of a debate that we're in. Two of the 3 matters that we could proceed with deal with foreign interference, and in continuation from what happened in the discussion from last Tuesday, we now have a prima facie case on a question of privilege, which always ends up at this committee, has now been unanimously adopted by the House by all political parties. Yet here we are unable to agree that that's the matter that we should be discussing upon the order from the House and or the finding in the House. So my colleague Mr. Cooper, my colleague Mr. Duncan, and my colleague Mr. Berthold have all moved motions to adjourn the current debate on the current motion so that we can proceed to either discussion or pursue discussing another motion to discuss the pressing matter from the House. So I just want to remind colleagues, and we have spent a lot of time talking about foreign interference. We have a public inquiry, yet here we are again with new revelations in the media, with new information about the PRC's continued interference and, frankly, what I would construe to be aggressive behavior towards not only the democratic institutions, such as our federal elections, but now in what I would consider to be personal attacks against members of the House of Commons and Senate. And I presume every member here operates in good conscience and in good faith, but to know that my emails, my personal devices, my iPad, my computer has been the target of a cyber attack, or could have been. So far, we only know of 18. And I'll remind colleagues that when we first started hearing about foreign interference from China, we heard about potential 1 or 2 people that might have been affected in nominations. And then it grew to 11 people that might have been unduly influenced during nomination processes, with funding coming bankrolled by the PRC from multiple political parties, my party included. And now we're up to 18 parliamentarians, members of the House of Commons and Senate. So this doesn't appear to be, and anything that we have started to do doesn't appear to be dissuading the People's Republic of China. And we've been talking about this issue for quite some time. We finally have a piece of legislation dealing with what I would consider to be a portion of the broader conversation about Chinese interference in our institutions. And I think, my opinion would be, and my advice to colleagues would be, given the fact that it is now May, we have 5 more weeks after this week, once we return from the May long weekend break next week. I wish you all safe travels and good health and rest and recuperation. We'll come back for 5 weeks. It will be, as we all know, a challenging and trying time, because the weather will be good and there will be other things that we'd rather go do, and we'll be feisty. And if the last 18 years are any indication of what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks, I can predict that that will be the case. And that's fine. I don't take it personally. I don't think any of us should take these things personally. That's just the adversarial nature of our system. And that's why I'm concerned. I'm not just concerned for the sake of my own colleagues, Mr. Jennis and Mr. Chong or any others. I'm concerned for all of you. You're all my fellow citizens. Well, Mr. Desilets, I'm not trying to impugn anything that you might disagree with that. But while we disagree or have an adversarial system, you're all my fellow citizens. And I want you all to have the same protection and afforded the same ability to carry out your duties. Whether I agree with what you have to say or not, we all have the right to say it without intimidation and without being put in a vulnerable position because we have not done an adequate job as a parliament or as a government to address what is becoming a clear pattern of a clear threat from a clear source. And we have 5 weeks left after the break. We adjourn, then we come back, and we at best have 1 full parliamentary cycle. That's all we'll have left, is 1 full parliamentary cycle. Because if we do have an election in October of 2025, if this parliament goes to the end, I doubt we'll be returning in September of next year. We'll go right into the writ period. So we basically have, as a committee, 1 full calendar year plus 5 weeks to study, make recommendations, and have the government respond to those recommendations, hopefully, if necessary, through any legislative changes that might be required, and then pass those laws in both chambers and have royal assent prior to the next election for the betterment of the integrity of our elections and for the betterment of the ability of our agencies to protect us not only as candidates, but also as parliamentarians in the interim. And that's not a long timeline. So really the question, as I see it, is what will our priority be? Is there any bad issue before us? No, all of them are worthy of discussion and consideration, all of them. But which one could we do the most good with, and which one is most important? And I would say issues of significant national interest, in this case, the ruling of the prima facie case of members' privileges as determined by the Speaker and the rest of our colleagues in the House, as supported. It seemingly, I didn't see anybody speaking against this notion from any political party in the debates that took place last night and this morning. I'm frankly flabbergasted that this doesn't automatically position this issue as a priority for this committee to study and examine. So we're going to continue to, I believe, make that case. On the matter of the motion and the amendment and the sub-amendment before us, we have many things that we need to, I believe, revisit in the ongoing foreign interference study in our electoral systems. Madame Oug's interim report has given us many things that we could continue to talk about, not the least of which is numerous contradictions of evidence and testimony that this committee heard that was contradicted by evidence and findings, preliminary findings by Madam Justice Hogue. We have what I believe is a fairly legitimate allegation of a breach in the law when it comes to the secrets that ought to have been kept for those who are entitled to secret briefings from our intelligence officials who have allegedly passed that secret information on to a candidate for, I believe it's Don Valley North, which I think needs to be fleshed out to determine what exactly happened there. Many members of Parliament at this committee made vehement arguments that we as members of Parliament at this committee ought not to have access to classified or secret information. Numerous attempts for us to request documents to be scrutinized by our parliamentary law clerk and then distributed to members of this committee have been defeated time and time and time again by the Liberal and NDP members of this committee. And yet now we have an example where somebody who hadn't ought to have had that information, notwithstanding the media, which seems to still have access to more information and documents than I do as a duly elected member of Parliament of this place. But now we have a very credible scenario where I guess it's not okay for members of Parliament to request this classified information through the eyes of our parliamentary law clerk, but it's completely okay to pass this information on if you're the governing party to one of your candidates in an election. It seems to be a bit of a double standard, and I think we need to get to the bottom of that. Madam Justice Hogue has spoken in her report, or written in her report, that there seems to be a clear communications issue, not only between the government, the decision makers, and those who work in the bureaucracy, but there also seems to be a breakdown between our various departments. And there certainly is a lot of questions still surrounding what the bar is for alerting not only members of parliaments and candidates, but when the public is notified about foreign interference. And my former colleague Kenny Chiu, I believe, had the government done its job and had we had the right protocols in place, may still be here as a member of Parliament in this place. And what consequence have we demonstrated to the People's Republic of China as a response? A lot of hemming and hawing, a lot of obfuscation, a lot of blocking, hiding and covering up of information through the foreign interference and matter of privilege for Mr. Chong to date. So here we are, as Conservatives at least, wanting to continue on to discuss now the new outstanding matters in foreign interference. I can tell you that I'm here in good faith, to make good recommendations, hopeful recommendations, wise recommendations to a government that I believe should be taking this issue much more seriously than it currently is. And then, between Tuesday and today, as a matter of fact, in the time that this committee has started, after 11 o'clock this morning, moments after this committee has started its deliberations or continued deliberations, the House adopted the notion and motion that there is another breach of privilege. Prima facie case has been made. Arguments have been made by members from all parties, that the People's Republic of China, the communist regime there, is personally going after members of the House of Commons and the Senate. And if you don't think that that's serious, well, I know it's on my phone. I'm assuming we all know what's on our phone. What's on our computers. But if they can get to us, they can get to anybody that is anybody in this country. If they can get to us, they can get to anybody. They can get to our families. They can get to our staff. They can infiltrate our political headquarters. And that's what their prime directive would be, in my opinion, is to create mistrust in electoral results, to create disunity and disharmony in the social fabric of our country. And I think all of us would agree that that's something we would want to prevent and avoid, which is why I believe we should act in unity and unison in addressing this issue at this committee. This is the committee that deals with these questions of privilege. And while we are free to set our own priorities, I think it behooves us to take more seriously and as a higher matter of priority a question of a privilege that's referred to us by the House. And to remind colleagues once again of the timelines, if we're going to properly study this and discuss the witness list on the notice of motion that my colleague Mr. Cooper has put before this committee, I would love to hear about any other witnesses that my colleagues from other political parties would have to say about who ought to be summoned to the committee to testify, to find out why, again, we're in this scenario where it took 2 years. It's untenable to me that a member of parliament or a senator, their office, their staff, their family members would be subject to cyber attacks and not be told. So I would just implore you, colleagues, this is a matter where we have to defend each other, defend our institutions, and defend our nation, frankly, from a very nefarious and a very troublesome, and frankly, to this date, apparently a very effective foreign government that's acting very adversarially, in fact, even confrontationally to our nation. And I don't know if this threat is coming right out of Beijing on a daily basis. I don't know if it's asymmetric. I don't know if there are elements of our own society here that are sympathetic. I still, to this day, am not clear, in spite of all of the meetings that we've had, dealing with the question of privilege for our colleague Mr. Chong and the yet unfinished broader study of foreign interference in our elections, of just the depth of interference more broadly from various sources, but particularly from the People's Republic of China. And I think we have an opportunity as a committee in a moment of unity for the sake of our country, for the sake of each other as members of Parliament, because only we, doesn't matter what political party you get elected under the banner of, only we truly understand what this job is about. And we have an opportunity to actually do the right thing, in my opinion, and not only defend our nation, but defend each other and get to the bottom of how this, what I would consider to be egregious scenario has happened, and make good and wise recommendations to the government to ensure that these things don't happen again. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll cede my time and ask to be put back on the bottom of the list.
Thanks very much, Mr. Calkins. Ms. Matheson, the floor is yours.
There's been a lot of conversation from one side alone, so I am grateful for this opportunity to try and straighten out some things. There seems to be a great deal of misrepresentation by the Conservatives here at this committee, specifically against the NDP and, yes, the Liberals, and I cannot speak for them, but I certainly do speak for myself and for my party, in that we absolutely have every intention of treating the issue of foreign interference seriously. And I don't understand, and I am so sorry, that the Conservatives on this committee think so little of me in terms of my intentions to bring forward this motion that we are discussing here today, despite the fact that the majority of it has been on foreign interference instead of harassment. I am so sorry that they think so little of me in this regard. They have quoted my colleagues, of which I am entirely in agreement. I believe that we have every responsibility to study this issue thoroughly. But I've also seen so much happen within this institution and to this institution, the people that work within it, not just members of Parliament. And so when Conservatives say that this is only us talking about ourselves, this is not the case. This is about the people who serve this institution. This is about the people who believe in this institution and who are impacted. This is about future generations that will also serve this institution, hopefully better than some of us. I brought forward this study because I was asked to, not by just members of my party, and by women. So I would like for the entirety of the men who have spoken here today to think a little bit about that. Maybe take that back. We have been listening about how apparently only the Conservatives think that this is such a huge issue. That is not the case. The degradation of this institution, both from outside and from inside, are equally disturbing. Why can't we talk about both? We have 10 meetings left before the end of this session, before we rise for the summer. Why can't we do both at the same time? Why can't we show Canadians that we are capable of doing that for the sake of this institution? I would ask that we can, in fact, study both at the same time, because I think that both impact each other in many, many ways. There's been conversations about maybe potentially the extension of meetings so that we hear more before we do have to break. But the issue of foreign interference isn't just going to take us the 10 meetings or so that we have left And it's 10 meetings now because there's been so much filibustering. It's not 11. I would like to point that out. I came to this committee with the best of intentions to make this a mature, adult conversation that we could have to make my workplace, but the workplace for many others, better. I ask you to make it better. I would hope that the Conservatives aren't just trying to avoid the conversation of harassment. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they have not given me. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they do, in fact, want to make this institution better, both internally and externally. And I truly believe that we can do that. But we're going to have to do it together. Yeah, we work in a minority parliament. Deal with it. Yeah, we're going to have to get past, and I'm going to have to get past the anger that has been seething within me for the last couple days, listening to the constant attacks. I'm going to have to deal with that. I'm going to have to go into the House and hear it yet again and try and deal with it and come to a better place on how we deal with it. But that was the purpose and the point of this study. And it's supposed to be the start of that conversation. That many members of Parliament, many people within the institution, many of those who support us on a daily basis, whether we see it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, are dealing with. Because we have that impact on them. That's what I wanted to accomplish today. I am so sad that we can't get past some of the partisanship to do that. For the health of this institution, for our democracy that has been railed about for the last 2 days. 2 committee meetings. I am so sorry that that is the case right now. And I hope that we can come and after, whether we come back after question period or not from this, and continue to discuss it or not, or whether we go back to our constituencies and think about what we really want to see from our institution, and whether we can actually have both conversations at the same time, so that we're truly getting to a place that we all agree upon. And I would like to remind this committee that that motion that will come to us and that has been referred to PROC about foreign interference was adopted unanimously in the House, was spoken about by all parties as to the severity and the seriousness of it in this House, and that we all agree. So instead of this partisanship and gamesmanship, rage farming, consistent attitude that we seem to have, let's get past it. Please, let's just get past it. Let's figure out a way that we can do that together. I implore you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, Madame Matheson. Mr. Ginnis, welcome to committee. You are next on our list. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair. I do want to start by congratulating you on becoming the chair of the Procedure and House Committee, Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I wonder if it's one of those things where when you're the new guy, you have to do the job that nobody else wants. But but no, in all seriousness, congratulations. And so there's some irony in where I am sitting in the room, because I am sitting in a seat that is normally where witnesses sit, because we have a large number of members. And I had anticipated that the next time I would be back at this committee might be in that role of a witness, because it was my question of privilege granted by the prima facie case of privilege by the Speaker that led to the referral to this committee on the matter of foreign interference. So I do want to just briefly share with committee members what happened to provoke this case, and hopefully it helps members to understand the importance of proceeding in the fashion proposed by my Conservative colleagues. So in 2021, 18 Canadian parliamentarians, we know now 18 Canadian members of Parliament, pardon me, not members of Parliament, 18 Canadian parliamentarians, including members of Parliament and senators, faced a cyber attack from what's known as APT-31, a China-based PRC-affiliated hacking outfit that was targeting specific legislators around the world because of their affiliation with an organization called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC. IPAC does incredible, effective work bringing together legislators from across the world and from different political traditions to work together on issues related to China. The IPAC model is that in every country where legislators are members, they have co-chairs from two different parties. So in this case, for instance, both John McKay and I serve as co-chairs and have been being able to work very, very collaboratively together, including in the context of raising this issue in the House. MP McKay and I, as well as 16 other parliamentarians, were subject to this cyber attack in 2021. We were not told about it. The cyber attack came to our attention because a few weeks ago, an unsealed indictment in the United States revealed that there had been this global attempt by APT-31 to target IPAC legislators, and this was the first time IPAC found out about it. So they followed up with the U.S. government saying, "Hey, it sure would have been nice if you told us." That our members and our organization were targeted by APT-31. And what ensued was some dialogue between the various organs of the U.S. government and the IPAC Secretariat, in which they identified that that they did become aware of this attack. They did disseminate information, but because of sovereignty concerns, it is not the policy of the FBI, for better or worse, to contact directly individuals in other countries that are subject to these kinds of attacks. Instead, it is their policy to disseminate this information through notifications to governments, and then the governments respond accordingly. In some cases, legislators were informed, and in some cases, legislators were not informed at the time that this information was received from the U.S. government. In Canada, we were not informed, so this information, the details of which were subsequently shared with the IPAC Secretariat. Mr. McKay and I were jointly briefed, followed by a briefing to members of other members of the IPAC membership who were affected, and we subsequently both raised a question of privilege now a week and a half ago, which was the first Monday back from a break week, during which we had received this briefing. So the question of privilege was raised. There were a number of other interventions, and the Speaker granted in a ruling last night that this did constitute a prima facie case of privilege. I presume, I hope that there is an appreciation here of the seriousness of the events that I've just described. What matters is the mechanism, the action, the fact that it was a cyber attack. But what matters more, I think, is the intention, the objective of the attack. This was a pixel reconnaissance attack. So what that means is it's kind of an introductory attack, a reconnaissance attack aimed at gathering initial information, which will then be used subsequently for further attacks. So those further attacks could take the form of attempted surveillance, disruption, identifying things that were involved, and perhaps identifying individuals that we are corresponding with and putting some pressure on them, or applying additional pressure or surveillance to those individuals that we're corresponding with. We don't really know what all the follow-up of these initial reconnaissance attacks were. And although the House of Commons has said that the attack was unsuccessful, they they can't know that because it was not only parliamentary accounts that were targeted. In my case, my personal account was targeted, a personal email account that is not publicly available anywhere, and I still don't know how APT 31 hackers got this information. So I was targeted at a personal, private place or context because of my parliamentary work. But the other issue is one MP in debate on this privilege motion yesterday in the House raised the fact that he had actually his staff had actually been able to find in their email account that these emails and they were fake news emails. And I'm not making an editorial comment when I say fake news. They were actually someone pretending to be part of a news organization and was not in the way that we often see it happening, but in a more uncommon way where they were identified as they were, and these fake news articles had pictures in them, and each of those pictures may have had 1 or 2 pixels on it that kind of opened up an access point into someone's computer and allowed them to gather more information. But the point I was making is just that one of the members during debate yesterday pointed out that his staff had been able to find these emails still in his account, which indicated that at least the emails did get through. So that raises some questions about whether we can be certain or not that there was an effective protection in the case of parliamentary accounts. But in any event, that doesn't apply to personal accounts, and in any event, that doesn't change the fact that people were targeted. So this is the context, and I hope members appreciate the seriousness because of the nature of the attack, but also the motivation that informs it, which is to disrupt our parliamentary work. This is why it's not just an unfortunate event, but it is a question of parliamentary privilege, because our constitutional framework recognizes that we have critical jobs to do as members of parliament, as part of our democracy, and that those jobs were interfered with through a foreign actor, and that in any case where there is some interference with our ability to do our jobs, that constitutes a matter of privilege, and that Parliament prioritizes dealing with that, as certainly we have. So that kind of brings us up to where we were last night, the Speaker's ruling and the subsequent debate that occurred, where many members made the point that it is an attack on our privilege, that there was this foreign interference in our democracy happening again, and that for the second time, the government failed to inform members of the fact that there was a threat to them or an attack on them by a foreign actor. Members will recall that this committee studied the issue of the threats against Michael Chong's family in detail, and there were threats against Michael Chong's family. What happened in that case was found to be a prima facie breach of privilege by the Speaker, and in the context of some of the conversation around that, the government issued a ministerial directive aimed at ensuring members would more likely be informed of threats against them. But still, in this case, that did not happen. Now, the events in the context of this hacking happened before the new ministerial directive came in place, but you would still expect that the ministerial directive would reasonably be interpreted. I hope that if there were threats that were made against members or attacks against members that are still relevant to their lives today, that in the context of the new directive, members would be informed. And I think perhaps one thing that can be looked at in this study is just getting some clarity around the fact that if there were threats that the government became aware of that started prior to that new directive that are still applicable to members of Parliament, that in light of that new directive, members should certainly be informed. So it seems to be the case that in spite of some of the statements that were made, that there are still these outstanding issues of threats that have been made that may and likely do have ongoing relevance to members, which members have not been informed about. So this is what kind of is the critical issue going into this discussion: what happened, why it happened, what the motivation was, and how we respond. And I hope the response is for this committee to put together robust, detailed recommendations on how to ensure this never happens again, ensure that members of Parliament are informed, that in general, when people are subject to foreign interference threats, that they're informed, that there's not a hiding of information, rather that the information is is given to those who need it, those who can then use that information to take steps to protect themselves. I do hope we also see action, by the way, on holding APT 31 accountable. One piece is protecting ourselves and addressing the privilege issues here. Another piece is the response to APT 31. I believe, and IPAC legislators across the world have called for the sanctioning of individuals affiliated with APT 31 involved in trying to attack our parliamentary institutions through hacking. We should obviously respond to those kinds of actions with strong sanctions. And I speculated last night that one of the reasons the government may not have wanted members of parliament to be aware of what was happening is because informing members of parliament would likely have led to calls for a strong response in particular, holding accountable those that were perpetrating this hacking. So this morning, there was an agreement in Parliament to move this issue quickly to this committee. There was a unanimous decision by the House of Commons to adopt my motion, which was in the context of the privilege question. My motion was that this matter be referred to this committee. And I think that, needless to say, that referral by the House on a matter of privilege is a very serious matter. There are many other issues that this committee could look at that are issues of great importance, naturally. But there are a limited number of matters that have been referred to this committee by the House, by unanimously members of Parliament from all parties saying that this is a pressing matter relating to the privileges of parliamentarians, and we need PROC to provide an answer in terms of what has happened and what can we and should we do going forward in response to that. And recognizing the electoral timeline, the election, if certain events remain in the trajectory they are in, we'll have an election next fall. Of course, in a minority parliament, an election can always happen sooner. And I would submit to you that given the importance of this matter, it's important for our democracy that there are some critical issues of foreign interference that need to be addressed and resolved prior to the next election. And one of them is the resolution of this matter of members of parliament facing cyber attacks and being able to receive the information related to those attacks and protect themselves in the context of those attacks. And this is why Conservatives have moved an amendment to the existing study motion to emphasize that the study, the other study that has been proposed on an important subject matter begin after the completion of this committee's work on foreign interference. I think that respects the mandate that this committee has, and actually that all parliamentary committees have, as creations of the House of Commons. That the House of Commons creates parliamentary committees. Their primary responsibility is not to envision themselves as a group of independent members of Parliament pursuing, doing their own thing, so to speak. They shape their own agendas, generally speaking, but the exception is when they're given direction by the House, and their primary responsibility is to report to the House on the matters that they study. And the foreign interference issue is one that the Speaker has ruled on, that the House as a whole has unanimously pronounced itself on, and therefore it is an issue where the committee should prioritize reporting back to the House. I hope that as part of this study, that the various members who are affected by this foreign interference issue, as well as senators, are given an opportunity to present. Some have not indicated publicly, but everyone impacted has been informed. And we need to hear about the decision not to inform members. The justification that the government has used for not informing members is to say, well, we passed information along to certain officials within the House of Commons. Their argument is, well, I would say it admits more than it denies. The government admitted that they received this information from the FBI regarding attacks on members, and that they chose not to share it with members. And they said, to paraphrase the Parliamentary Secretary, something to the effect that, well, because of the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative, we decided to tell Parliament instead of to tell parliamentary officials instead of to tell members of Parliament. I am not aware of any tradition of legislative executive power separation that prohibits the executive from informing individual legislators of information that's relevant to them. Of course, the nature of our system is we have executive branch and we have a legislative branch, and those branches talk to each other, right? It happens every day in question period. It will happen shortly, and it happens in the form of informal conversations or cases where, if the government is working on pieces of legislation, they will inform members of certain things they're working on, certain intentions, et cetera. So it doesn't follow for me that that somehow the separation of powers that should exist includes a prohibition on members of the executive or organs of the executive communicating with individual members of Parliament. I accept and I understand, of course, that the mandate of our security agencies has generally been to report to the government, not to report outside of government. But that makes the point all the more that it should have been a decision of a directive of government to say this is information critical to our democracy, and sharing that information allows members to protect themselves. And I'll just say in general, very often when it comes to foreign interference in general, this government always wants to hide information, even in cases where sharing information likely is an effective way of combating that interference. Someone once said sunlight is the best disinfectant. In the case of foreign interference, sometimes simply knowing that foreign interference is happening and knowing that particular messages, presentations emanate from foreign interference, sometimes just having that information out there helps to reduce the impact of that foreign interference. But this government, they look for every possible excuse not to share information, even if the national interest would actually be more clearly and directly advanced if that information was shared. So I maintain very strongly that the government should have shared this information with us, and it was disappointing to hear during debate last night the parliamentary secretary to the government House leader again doubled down on basically saying, in spite of the Speaker's ruling, he didn't think the government did anything wrong. The parliamentary secretary's position, if it reflects the government, then the government's position as a whole is that the government did not do anything wrong, and that's a big problem because it was wrong for them not to inform us. I see Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You'll certainly maintain your spot in the speaking order should you choose to rejoin us at PROC when we convene again. Colleagues, we are about to be out of resources, so I am going to suspend this meeting, and we will gather again when we gather again. Thank you. Give me some more clarity.